Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. Really excited to have all of you with us for this exciting webinar today, which is about creating a blueprint for digital success in the US retirement industry. This is a congruent webinar series, and I'm going to be a moderator for this discussion. And I'm going to introduce myself and let my illustrious panelists introduce themselves. So I'm Ronak Doshi. I'm a partner with Everest Group. I lead a global financial services research and really excited to partner with Congruent and talk about what are we seeing in the industry, but also hear from our panelists today. So I want to go to our panelists and I'm going to pick on them as I see them on my screen out here. So Steve, I'm going to go first to you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. Steve Schweitzer from Edgeco Holdings, responsible for the product platform for both American Trust Retirement Services and their white label partners. So overall responsibility for development and compliance with the regulations.
Steve, it's amazing to have you here with us. Thank you. Tim, next over
Okay.
to you.
Yeah, so my name's Tim Scott. I'm with Enterprise Iron. I lead the business development efforts there, but about 40 years, a little over 40 years in the industry, having worked for the two major record keepers, the SunGard and FIS, and now SS&C. During that time, I've been with Enterprise Iron for about 8 years now.
Thank you, Tim. Mahesh, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mahesh Natarajan. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Congruent. And I've been in this industry for 25 plus years, consulting with a lot of retirement providers. And Congruent, as all of you know, is a SaaS platform and a services provider, specifically in the retirement vertical. So look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mahesh. And one of the things I wanted to start this discussion off is this concept of debt, right? So as I look at the retirement industry, we speak to so many of you, and one of the things that keep coming again and again is we have process debt, we have data, technology, and even talent, right? We talk about the challenges with retirement cliff and what we are seeing in the industry. All of that creates massive pain, right? So again, if you think about it, this is about as we're looking at our efficiency targets, as we're looking at our productivity target, experience and growth targets, we do see these debt kind of holding us back, be it skill, technology, process, and data. And as we are at the cusp of all the technology revolutions, be it everything good that's happening with cloud to everything that we're talking about data and now AI and specifically agentic AI, there's a lot more to be done out here. And as we talk about a blueprint for success in this industry, we need to tackle these inefficiencies, tackle these heritage systems that we have, and bring new fresh energy to how we want to talk about retirements as a whole. So I'm excited about this industry. If I just look at the US, 401k business, and if I look at the overall DC business, we have like $3.4 trillion asset under management. It is the largest industry in terms of the scale and size and complexity and all that we do. So as we delve deeper into it, right, I want to kind of unpack all of this with the panel, talk about what are the current state, right? What are the challenges? Let's first understand the pain before we get to the blueprint out here. So Steve, I wanted to come to you, right? One of the things we do want to start with is the technology pain points, right? Which is as we think about all of this from cyber automation initiatives to migration to new infrastructure. And then we're talking about how do we do all of this to improve experiences. We're talking about employee, policyholder, again, plan sponsors, everybody's experiences. And then we're also talking about compliance, regulations, and everything that's happening in the industry. As you reflect on all of this, right, what are the key obstacles, right? What is preventing firms to move towards more modern solutions, more agile way of working out here? What's been your experience?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think you touched on it briefly in the intro is, you talk about the integration of a lot of different commercial and custom applications. So, we're an industry that balances, the commercial needs, where it's a record keeping system, a document system, with a lot of surround applications, to create documents, enrollment books, disclosures, onboarding processes. So you've got this mix of homegrown technology and stuff throughout the industry and even beyond the industry. You think of like CRM systems, which aren't necessarily retirement, but integral to how we conduct our business. So the lifecycle management of all that legacy system becomes a challenge. When compared to some of the commercial market, it definitely evolves at a slower pace. I think the other additional challenge which you kind of layer on top of that is the complexity and the velocity of regulatory change. So we're always having this kind of struggle between trying to move technology forward, to your point, modernizing and adopting best practices, but at the same time, making sure we remain compliant. In the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of regs, very complex regulations. So there's always that, compliance first, evolution second. And sometimes you're fortunate enough you can use the compliance as an opportunity to upgrade or retire old systems. But at the same time, with finite resources and the challenges that go with it, and probably more on the horizon, it is something of a struggle. In terms of the most pressing, though, I would agree on your comment around data. We're becoming more and more personalized at this point. The days are gone where it's a generic interface or a generic interaction. We're moving from more passive to predictive analytics. We really need to think through more online. That's going to be more and more critical as we go forward.
No, I completely agree. And Tim, I wanted to, get you in also in the conversation, right? What do you see are the big challenges to modernization in your experience?
Yeah, so I think certainly with what Steve had to say, I agree, particularly about the regulatory complexity and the challenges that all creates. I was in a meeting this past weekend with a number of public sector retirement agencies, and someone whispered "Secure 3.0," and everybody rolled their eyes, and thought, the consensus is we don't even have technical corrections for 2.0, and now people in DC are talking about the next big thing. So certainly that uncertainty of what's going to happen regulatory wise, and the impact that it has on our systems is huge. The other thing, though, I'd like to talk about briefly, and it has to do with this issue of legacy applications. In today's world, no IT executive wants to be the next face to show up on Wall Street Journal because of a data breach or a hack of their systems, right? So many of our systems that are in use today have vulnerabilities because they're old languages or old platforms. They're easily hit. So I was thinking about this last night. I looked through some of my files, and I have 3 or 4 letters from firms warning me that my data may have been hacked on their systems. And I assume pretty much everybody has that, right? They're offering you a free monitoring service. I kind of laughed about maybe that's a good business model for the monitoring services companies, but anyway, it's just a joke. I've seen estimates that financial services firms are spending about 10% of their total IT budgets just on cybersecurity, and that number is growing. That's a massive cost if you think about it, but given that the average cost of a data breach has been estimated globally at $5 million per event. And in the US, because, we are exceptional, it actually averages about $10 million per event. So that doesn't even take into account the reputational risk of these breaches and things like that. So trying to address the cyber front while simultaneously addressing all of those issues that Steve brought up makes it not a fun time to be an IT executive. We long for the days of the Nigerian prince with the poorly written emails and the misspelled words. The hackers have gotten a lot more sophisticated since then.
I so agree. The sophistication of fraud is going to increase, right? With AI, it's also going to get much more. With real-time transactions, it's going to get a lot more. And I think we will have to investigate how do we do that better. And I think to Steve's point in terms of the challenges with data, challenges with processes, and a combination of what you said, that's kind of showcase the challenges we see when it comes to modernization. But Mahesh, from your experience, you worked with the largest of the retirement firms, kind of combing through their systems, looking at their processes and data and all of those challenges that we're speaking about. What's been your experience?
No, I agree with what Steve and Tim said, right? Reg, cyber, legacy. But another one I've heard from all of the players, right? Just step back from this, right? All of us are in the retirement industry, and we struggle to understand the complexity of it. Now, think about people that are not within the industry. And when you start peeling the layers, right? The sheer number of stakeholders involved, while it's simplistically we think of it as sponsors, providers, and participants, There are a host of others in this, right? Whether it's investments, 316s, 338s, advisors, plan advisors. And that is the one that's driving a lot of complexity in the needs for integration. And the second one is constantly the industry is under the fee pressure, right? The margins are thin. So for anybody to make large investments, it's not easy. And you pair that with there is no incentive for perhaps legacy platform providers to make any big change because there is no money to be made. So if you really put all of this together, people end up doing patchwork of AI or data and others. So you really have a Frankenstein patchwork, which really slows down your ability to react to a reg issues, or even if you need to put a new product. So that's kind of what I see as really this thing that's holding back the industry from moving forward.
And at the same time, Mahesh, we do see this startup culture coming in, right? We're talking about we want the fintech experience to be given to our customers along with all of this, right? So with this rapid adoption of these fintech solutions, challenger solutions, which are trying to kind of reimagine the experiences. How do we think about the overall financial wellness of customers, and how do we think about themes that you talked about, right? From planning to advisory to product. How do you do all of that? I think that's becoming a core theme. And as we look at client expectation, and Tim, I wanted to start with you, right, on this one specifically. As we see, right, again, with a fintech or a startup kind of culture, the client expectations, right, are increasing, right? They're saying, I also want the same experience that I get for my Uber or my Amazon. I need the same experience on the retirement channels as well. How do you see, right, again, where is the industry on it, and what are the challenges as they think of these modern experiences to be built out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suspect there's probably a lot of ways you could look at it, but for me, one of the things that I've noticed through the years is that financial services firms tend to be more conservative, and sometimes that means they're a little bit behind the curve when it comes to innovation and change. Retirement services providers tend to even be less on the bleeding edge. So, when I was at a former employer, we had a consulting practice that was dedicated to media, to the media industry. You might think that's kind of odd, but the reason for it was at the time, media tended to be 18 to 24 months ahead of financial services in adopting new technologies. So we saw it as an opportunity for us to take something we were learning from our media clients and bring it to our financial services clients. But, in thinking about client expectations these days, you've got, as Mahesh pointed out, you've got participants, advisors, sponsors, consultants, all these different constituencies, right? And probably a lot that I haven't even mentioned. Participants expect, as you said, their retirement plan experience to mirror that of their banking or social media, their other online experiences. So they maybe expect an app for managing their account or online real-time capabilities and so forth. The expectations of the participants have been elevated, I think, because of what they see in other industries. Advisors are looking for a book of business view, where they can manage all of their clients' business. And then you have plan sponsors that, quite honestly, sometimes are looking to push off their fiduciary liabilities as much as possible, but also expect a seamless, integrated online experience to manage their plan. So then you layer on top of that, it's further complicated because we still have, depending on how you count them, 5 to 6 different generations that are either contributing to, participating in, paying out of, they're in our retirement plans. Each of these generations expects to be communicated with in different channels, right? I'll never forget my mother, always wanted to talk to somebody on the phone. She wanted to have a live operator on the phone. She didn't want to, she wouldn't have known what to do with a computer if you gave her one. So every generation has their own way of doing things. All of that stresses the infrastructure to support that kind of multi-channel delivery. So those are just a few things that come to mind for me on that question.
Thanks, Tim. I think you covered so much, right? From generational experience paradigms to, how we are thinking about channels to omni-channels and, all of that kind of coming together. But Steve, I wanted to get your views also on this one. How are you seeing the fintech-like experience impacting, the retirement industry?
Now, I'll give a lot of what Tim said. It makes a lot of sense. And some of it harkens back to what we talked about before around the kind of our historical setup and legacy systems, right? We've gone through a lot of evolution of the online experience, right? We started, you're right, back in the day, it was call centers and phones. There was no online experience, right? The first foray was desktop only. And we did our best to build what we thought was a good experience, which, if we're honest with ourselves, was probably the project team that was tasked with that particular initiative, and they did the best of what they thought was a good experience, right? There really wasn't a lot of separation and specialization around UX and data. Next thing you know, tablets came out, and then it was the phone. And then we talk about watches and smart devices like Alexa and Google. And the problem is, we build ourselves around a kind of a integrated stack of presentation, business logic, and data. And we need to do a better job of pulling it apart so we can be more nimble as the different platforms evolve, right? We don't know what tomorrow brings. There's something out there, I'm sure, and it will evolve, but we need to be in a position to adapt to it as it does, does occur. So I'd say, how we're constructed versus how we're moving is a little bit of a disconnect. We really do need to get much more modular in our construction. And take it from a slightly different angle, another thing that complicates maybe our expected and desired outcome is, the relationship with particularly with the participant is a very fleeting one, right? People are changing jobs every 3 or 4 years. So engaging them over the long term isn't really a reality. So we have a lot of transient relationships. There's a lot of starting up and re-educating on about what we can and cannot do. And I think auto enrollment, which is a fantastic thing, and all the benefits we've seen from it, is going to add to that complexity, right? You're going to have more and more participants that are in the plan via disengagement, right? They've been auto enrolled, they'll be auto increased, they're auto invested. So they're really just very passive participants. So it kind of gives you a challenge to understand how effective you are in those communications. So I'd say, agree with everything Tim said. And I think one more thing on his generational comment was today's decision makers are the younger generation, right? So they grow up with today's technology. So not understanding maybe at least initially that we live under a very set of complex regulations and it limits what we can do, expectations are usually much higher than we can deliver on.
Yeah. Steve, I think so many words of wisdom in kind of, one single kind of, answer out here, right? So the nimbleness, the agility, the adaptability, and then thinking of componentization towards managing the complexity, right? Again, all of that coming together, it's a hard problem to solve. But Mahesh, I did want to kind of get your views on this, right? Because this is an important question, right? We're talking about fintech-like experiences. What are your views on that?
A couple of dimensions I would add, right? One, if you think of even fintechs, the ones that are successful, they're really feeding on clean data. And because the fintech solves specific problems for either a retirement provider and they are part of an overall ecosystem. So I really go back to foundationally, how do you ensure, because the complex systems end up generating a lot of data, some not clean, and how do we tackle that, right? That's what people are struggling with, right? If you clean that data and have a good, clean data that feeds into the fintechs, which in itself will enhance that experience, because it's not a either or, right? So the industry has to coexist with some of the fintechs that also provide a specific experience in particular value chain, or in many cases, even I would say replicate that experience, but all of them built on stronger foundational data, right? That's where I'm seeing more and more investments need to go, and I know we're starting to see that happen.
Yeah, and Ronak, just to add one thing. So I think Steve mentioned, or you mentioned nimbleness, right? So being able to be nimble and to move quickly. A lot of these smaller fintechs have that ability, whereas some of the larger organizations don't have that ability to be able to be nimble and change on a dime. So there's good and bad to that, but it's so there's a lot of good in having this these years and years of experience in these massive systems that understand the complexity that we're talking about, but then being able to change on a dime, it's very difficult to do.
I agree. And I thought that's where Mahesh would plug in saying, Congruent is that nimble startup which is there around with you on that journey. But again, I said it. I wanted to bring our audiences also into the conversation, right? So we do have a Q&A where you could ask us questions, but I wanted to do a quick poll, right? So we do have, one question we wanted to get, your opinion on, and you should start seeing the poll in front of you. So would love to get, everybody's response on this. And obviously the question, I think everybody is like, again, you will be asked about AI, right? So what are you experimenting with? Where are you adopting AI, right? Is it in the claims processing and administration? Are you seeing this in personalized communication, front office? Are you seeing this in retirement planning, fraud detection, risk management, IT, HR? Please let us know. You could select multiple of these. I'm sure you're doing multiple of these, so would love to see what our audience is doing. And again, Steve, Tim, Mahesh, as we kind of allow everybody to look at the question and select their opinions, do you have a bet on which one would be the number one here?
I would think probably automated administration
Yes.
would be very high up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would put that. I was kind of a tie between that and IT operations. There's a little bit of overlap there, if you will,
Right.
but I would agree with that.
Right.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're not trying to influence the votes or anything, but that'd be my guess.
Any rule-based, processing is
Right.
very high on automation, whether it's AI or otherwise.
Right.
So if I look at the answers, it's a mixed bag, right? Which is so fascinating when I see something like this. So you all were correct, right? So IT and automated claims processing and administration is tied number 2. So great guess. That's where we have the pulse of the industry and how our participants are thinking about it. And then personalization of the experience, communications and engagement with plan participants came up as the number 1. And then closely on number 3 is fraud detection and prevention, which is, yes, an absolutely a core piece of challenge that we're trying to look at. No, this is really good. Again, thank you all for sharing your response with us. This is exciting in terms of where AI is being used. And what I wanted to do is get to the conversation of AI and automation, right? It's one of my favorite topics right now. We're talking about efficacy, efficiency, experience, all driven through the power of data and AI and automation coming together. So as we think about it, right, the questions we're getting is what areas, right? What are the use cases that we want to do? And again, we already got an input from the audience out here, but we wanted to understand, right, what use cases and how do you do these use cases by keeping themes like compliance, themes like security in play. So just wanted to get the view of the group out here. Tim, I thought I'll start with you, and then we'll go to others on this one.
Okay, yeah. So I think, just looking at it from the perspective of what's the most ripe for automation, you have to look at where you have the largest footprint of human resources, right? So it's going to be your money in processes, payroll, census, things like that. Your money out processes, distributions, and loans and things like that. And then probably also your contact center processes. So really, those are the areas where you have the most people generally working, and so therefore they account for the highest costs, right? I think money in may be the easiest to automate because you don't have a lot of the complications that you have, say, with distribution processing, with requirements around spousal consents and all the forms that have to be signed and all of that. So that's probably the easiest area. Also, I think contact center is another one that could really leverage, and I think we saw that in our poll question there, interacting with participants and being able to support the contact center personnel through AI or through some other types of tools is, I think, another good use case for AI and for these types of things. I visited a client one time, and they I will only say it was in this century. I won't say when it was, but they were completely dependent upon paper files and clipboards hanging on filing cabinets and things like that for tracking their work. They had literally, if I was going to go process a transaction, I had to go over to the filing cabinet, take out my paper file, take down the clipboard and check out basically that file, hang it back up on the filing cabinet, go do my work, come back, check it back in, and so forth. And I was just thinking at the time, this particular the CTO, if he saw that, if he had seen what they were doing, he would have lost his mind. You know, fortunately, we've come a long way since then, but I still get a chuckle thinking about that because, you know, those are areas that anytime that there's a heavy dependence on human resources, on people doing things and doing things the right way, there's potential for error. There's potential for things getting lost, for transactions not getting processed, and so forth. So anywhere you can reduce the impact of the human error, reduce the impact of people making processing errors, it's a good thing. So those would be the areas that I think would be most ripe.
I completely agree. I think the customer experience and I think infusion in every process that you do makes sense. Mahesh, you have a very rich experience, going through the automation journey, the data transformation journey for several of the retirement customers of yours. How are you seeing AI automation now playing out, and how do we keep it safe?
Now, I just want to continue the continuum, right? Tim spoke about efficiencies, even effectiveness, and I add the experience element to it because there was one client where they said their sponsors are unhappy all the time, and that poor experience leads to plan retention issues. And right, wherever you see such problems, there is clearly something you can do with automation and AI. Similarly, in the onboarding, right, it's a time-consuming process, and there is a lot of ability to bring in AI to read the plan documents, do the setup is one use case we are seeing significantly. And anything where you need to interpret a document like trust account statements, right? Can I read it, use it to do the trust accounting is another big one we see. A lot of payroll files, right? The industry doesn't have a lot of standards today. Anybody can have any payroll file in any format, and AI can pretty much map those payroll files from multiple formats to a standard format. So that's another big use case. So for us, at least we see this in these three dimensions, right? Can I improve efficiency? Can I even, the money out distribution that he spoke about, could that be brought down to less than a day, literally hours? Can that be done, right? So you're effectively running operations. And if you do these two things, your experience for sponsors and participants is only going to increase. So I kind of see this as a broad spectrum of value chain, right from CRM to plan setup to plan administration to trust accounting, and eventually compliance testing, and pretty much there is applicability of AI and automation, and it's already happening. This is not theory, right? We're already doing it, and some of the audience are already experimenting with these things. So it's happening now. This is not the future.
That's amazing. I think you spoke about AI infusion in every process that we're kind of looking at it, and how do we kind of reimagine it. That's really powerful. Steve, I also wanted to get your views on this, right? And also, if I had to extend the thought on this, which is, what are these automation and AI use cases? That's absolutely important. There's also this conversation we are having around talent, right? We spoke about aging workforce. We are talking about the primary thesis around lack of availability of talent to drive these processes. There's a human augmentation, I think, theme that is emerging out here, right? So AI plus humans being more powerful. How are you seeing that play out?
Yeah, just to expand a little bit on what the others had said around AI, I would agree. I mean, we're already doing some pilot scenarios around the onboarding process, right? It is kind of the frustrating point of changing providers, right? It's a 45, 60 or a longer day process depending on the nature of your existing plan. So any way to expedite data gathering, validation, and system setup will go a long way through the AI channel. I just probably also, I mean, certainly it goes without saying, our biggest pain point, it feels like an eternal struggle at this point, is payroll, right? It's the data that unlocks everything from testing to interactions online, et cetera. And I would agree. I think it was said well in the previous comments here that we need to be agnostic on how we receive a payroll file. I mean, the ultimate answer to the client would be is I need a file with this data in it, and not care about the order or how it's structured, and be able to consume it so we can get a full data set. I think that's particularly important as you go down market. You know, the smaller the client, you know, the less tech savvy and resources available to interact with. And we really need to be very accommodating if we're going to get the data set that's necessary. On the online experience too, I think, yeah, maybe my interpretation a bit, right? Are we starting to move towards, you think about when we first did online experiences, feedback directly from the user was the way we validated if we're doing it right or what we needed to change. You know, along came Google Analytics, right? Anonymous data, but we had a large data set that basically showed what people were doing, how often, where they were struggling in a given workflow. You know, are we now getting basically a personalized Google Analytics at some point? You know, will I show up one day and log in and it says, all right, this is Steve. He typically goes over here first. And does it just like take me to a certain spot in the experience, right? Couldn't notice the fact that I went to the loan page twice and didn't execute a loan. And does it prompt me that, hey, are you trying to take a loan? Are you having any issues? You know, back to that, how do you alleviate some of the lower value interactions with the client through AI and leave the call center for the more consultative or deeper interactions that maybe, at least today, are not solvable by AI? So I think we're all in agreement, but yeah, I think there's different flavors of it.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So I think there is this world towards, you know, I think what Mahesh spoke about, right? And I think what you spoke about, the AI infusion into these processes and then augmenting the process and then kind of being very agnostic in terms of, you know, how we are thinking of data
Yep.
becomes very critical as we're looking at all of this. No, this is fantastic. And I want to get our audience back in, right? Want to have more conversation with them also. So we want to do one more poll out here because we do want to test about digital transformation and the budgets, right? Because one of the conversations we were having, I think 12 to 18 months back, was the challenge in terms of the budgets, right? Again, for transformation and how do we kind of drive cost optimization. I think we are in an era where we're seeing, hey, there is a lot of growth in the industry. We are looking at it in terms of product innovation, experience innovation, everything that we're talking about. How are your transformation budgets increasing? And just wanted to, you know, get a sense from our, you know, participants today on the call, in your organizations, where is the budget? Like, is it, you know, increasing over 10%, somewhere in the 5 to 10, 1 to 5? Is it, you know, staying flat? Is it marginally declining or significantly declining? How is it happening? And you know, as our audience responds, Mahesh, Tim, Steve, any thoughts on this? Where, again, I'm going to ask you the same question. Where do you see the industry?
I think
Yeah, I'd say,
digital.
yeah. Go ahead.
Now, just saying the definition of digital is changing, right? You know, AI was never in the scene a few years ago. Now that's part of digital. And, you know, in my view, if you really take all types of technology investments, that only continues to grow, right? Whether it's AI, data, integration, platforms, and even training your people, right, with technology. So in my view, it's continues to only evolve. And that, in fact, brings the deficiencies, which, you know, hopefully will drive better margins and thereby growth for the industry, right? That's kind of how I see this across the retirement space.
Yeah, I would have put it in the top two categories there somewhere. I think it probably intersects a bit, you know, the current maturity of the company we're speaking with, right? Those are catching up, probably spending a little bit more, and probably a little bit tied to how much you're insourcing versus outsourcing. So the cost model will look a little different, how you balance those two factors as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say also, I'm sorry, in addition to that, you know, kind of back to the question about the aging workforce, since I'm the aging workforce guy on the panel here. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that aging workforce that is they're the ones who know what these systems do, these legacy systems. So I kind of sound like a broken record talking about legacy applications, but I mean that's what these baby boomers who are retiring at a heavy clip every day, they know these systems, right? And so at Enterprise Iron, one of the things we're doing is we're working with folks to use AI to help assess those systems, to understand what's even there, what systems do, what the systems do, and what they're how they're written, and what their their needs are for modernization, to kind of help set up that modernization journey for them. So we're hearing a lot of folks increasing their budgets this year for this type of activity.
Okay, so let's find out. Let's see what the results are. So as it comes up, again, I think all of you, I think, were spot on, right? So a large portion is saying that there is going to be a significant increase in budgets, and there are folks around the moderate and marginally increase in staying flat, very few in the marginal decline, so which is powerful, right? So digital transformation is strong. It is one of the core thing, and this is going to accelerate significantly. So this is fantastic, and it kind of sets me up for the next section, which I want to talk about, right? Which is, as we think about digital transformation, what are the foundational pillars, right? As we look at or foundational investments that retirement firms need to do as they're thinking about digital strategies. And Tim, I wanted to come to you to get your views on this.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, but I'd like to focus on just really one item, and then we'll hear what the other guys have to say. But to me, having a functional organizational change management process is critical. So one of the first things you want to do is to make sure you get everybody on board, and get the entire team on board. We're not talking about just the executives and the directors and the folks who made the decision, but it includes Bob, the transaction processor, who's worried about, what do these changes mean for my job? Or Mary in the call center, she's getting close to retirement. She really doesn't want to learn a bunch of new stuff, right? So these people may not be leaders in an official sense, but they can influence the attitudes of the project team, especially when the inevitable challenges come up, right? So we know there are going to be challenges. You don't need these folks on the sidelines throwing rocks and saying, I told you so, because challenges will come up along the way. Kind of going hand in hand with that is this concept of failure is not an option. Having a cultural mindset that failure is not an option. I heard about one organization that was going through a major transformation, and their plan was to fail forward. Now, a cynical person might look at that and say, yeah, you see, they're already planning to fail, right? But I look at it and say, what they're saying is, we know there are going to be challenges, but we're not going to let those challenges derail us from reaching our ultimate goals. And they didn't. They were able to get through and they're on the other side of it now. So they're going to keep moving forward and keep the momentum going. One time I had a client who came to me in the middle of a project, and he says, if this project goes live, I didn't really like the way he started out the sentence, but if this project goes live, it will be the first in my career that has done so. Now that's a company and a culture that has accepted failure. So make sure you get everybody on board before you start. Help them see the value not only to the company of this transformation, but to them as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah. Steve, as you think about, right, what are the foundational pillars for digital transformation? And at the same time, ask added question, right? How do we then balance the risk of digital adoption, right? Again, both of these will be very critical.
No, I'll spend what Tim says. Everything he says makes a lot of sense. And I think you have to recognize, and we just saw from the poll, right? The commitment's not cheap, right? This is not a project. This is a journey. It's perpetual in nature. It's always evolving. There's always a back and forth between you and the client. And again, you have to think about what's the right resource model. I think you have to kind of look inside first to understand what your competencies are internally. And do you need to start with a lot of external support? And so you learn to understand the difference of best UX practices. Do you move it inside? Do you stay in a hybrid model? Finding that right balance between experts externally and the experts internally. And it really does need to be centrally owned. It can't be a patchwork of independent decisions. It's a core competency of what we do and what you need to do. So someone needs to own the vision, understand the long-term strategy, and guide the teams towards that. You don't want to. There's so much vested in this part of what we do. You don't want to find out 2 years later that, had you known something, you would have done it differently, because unwinding a lot of that work is incredibly expensive. So it doesn't mean you're going to predict the future, and that, of course, that'll never happen, but being more methodical and deliberate about how you progress, I think, is incredibly important. And around the risk, what I've always seen is, involving compliance and legal early. It's such a changing landscape, right? Security standards change constantly. We mentioned it before. The bad actors are getting worse. They're smart. They adapt quickly, and we got to bring in new technologies. And we have a lot of data, a lot of very sensitive data. So, it's that fine line between balancing literal risk and business risk, right? We can't be so literal that we do nothing. That's risky in itself. But at the same time, we can't be so cavalier that we don't recognize that we're being entrusted, quite frankly, which is probably the largest account for most people.
And Mahesh, to you, right? Again, same question, right? Foundational pillar for digital investments, and how do we avoid the risks? How do you see this?
Yeah, I want to take a more an organization view on this, right? Which is foundationally got to figure out if the organization is able to not only be agile, but take all the feedback from whether you fail forward or whatever you do, feed it back into your planning prioritization process, right? That's where people struggle. That's one I would put out there. And second is really micro transformations, right? Because nobody has the time and energy and others to do large scale, multi-year transformations. So I would say foundationally, the organization should be ready to do things in 6 months, get value, and then do all of that with intensity, right? Otherwise, it'll be one another project that doesn't deliver value. So pick a few with intensity, deliver value, and then go on to the next one. And I want to extend that to data as well, because the more complex systems, they generate more data, which means more issues, which perpetuates, again, it's a loop. And if anybody wants to build a very strong foundation, they got to tackle that, right? How do I stop from generating bad data, which perpetuates itself? And once you have at least a decent handle on that, I think then they're halfway through there.
That's fantastic, right? Again, and one piece of the puzzle out there has always been about what you measure is what you get, right? So as we think about most of the metrics have been about financial metrics, right? And Steve, I wanted to ask you specifically on this question. How do you see the ROI being measured beyond the typical financial metrics that we see?
Well, certainly it all kind of leads down to the same path, but if you're talking about the kind of the top line not being a direct financial measure, there's probably a couple of things that come to mind because everybody else says as well. I mean, client satisfaction, right? If we're honest, we're a fairly homogeneous product set in the marketplace. We're so regulatory driven that we do a lot of common things. User experience and client services is probably some of the final frontiers where you can differentiate yourself across the marketplace. The other piece I would say is, and it's important, and we talked about it here throughout the various questions, is the reduction of technical debt and risk. It's documenting the elimination of certain technologies or certain systems, and measuring it that way in terms of, again, that evolution to a more modern technology stack. We've all said it, and I know I'm sure we'll get a couple smiles here. Is how many times have we said, Steve got hit by a bus tomorrow, we'd be in real trouble. Because we do have a lot of vested domain knowledge in certain people. We haven't been great historians around documentation. So, getting away from those old legacy systems where it really was built by people who are no longer around is really critical as we go forward.
Perfect. No, again, that's helpful. Tim, just your views on the metrics to measure digital transformation. Any added ones that you want to look at?
Yeah, no, I think Steve hit on it. For me, it's the customer satisfaction, it's the net promoter scores, things like that. We believe that our customers can be our best sales team. So I would say, that's really the most important thing is beyond the financial thing is, are you doing something that's going to impact your customers in a positive way, and they're gonna tell other people about you. So that would be my comment.
No, that makes sense. Mahesh, any pieces of metrics?
I mean, the metrics are back to the 3 E's I mentioned, right? Experience, effectiveness, efficiencies. And, one of them will line up to the ROI, but the other two, you can have multiple measures underneath each of those 3 E's.
Makes sense. And Mahesh, I want to stay with you on this one, right? My next question. Challenges, and how do we create some logical pathways to drive transformation? But one of the themes we also want to look at what's next, right?
Yeah.
Because we spoke a lot about what's happening right now and what's in the near future, but the next and new is going to be very critical.
Right.
So how are you seeing the emerging technologies and their impact on the retirement industry?
Sure. I mean, coincidentally, I had a customer panel a couple of days ago, right? So about 8 of them. I asked them the question, what are you going to see in the emerging thing? And one thing that resonated with all of them, what they unanimously said was they're going to see not only the modernization, but the adoption of all of the newer things, whether it's AI, agentic AI, and analytics, and all of those are going to really exponentially increase in terms of adoption. That's the first one. And second, if you start applying that into what does it mean, it's really applied AI in any of the use cases we spoke about earlier, right? Is it hyper personalization? How do I apply AI in that as an example within the bounds of regulatory and compliance is one thing. The second one is, I think Steve touched on, how do I mix human and agents together? Call it agentic AI, but really working this workforce that is really blended. So clearly that's something, I expect that to happen. We already touched on cyber. I'm sure there are a lot more newer things going to come in biometrics and whatnot. But for us, especially a technology player, SaaS platform, what we see is, the SaaS platforms are going to more and more become an orchestration layer for all of these things, whether it's AI or agentic AI or other functional components. I think Steve touched on modular, and we are already modular, but we become more and more an orchestration layer. For a lack of a better word, you could call it as a co-pilot for retirement processes, because the Microsoft Copilot helps you with your day-to-day office tasks, but then you need a co-pilot for retirement industry specific. That is what I expect to emerge, and we're already, people are thinking about it.
Got it. And it's like, we're talking about AI, future of infrastructure for AI, and then, everything of its application. I think that's been a key conversation right now, so I agree. And then the conversation you had around cyber and, how all of that ties together. So completely in line with that. The other area, if you look at from a, platforms perspective and a role of platform and technology and services coming together is third party third party administrators, right? So the TPAs of the world. One of the things I do want to know, right? And again, Steve, I wanted to come to you on this one, right? Given we've talked about digital transformation, we spoke about AI, we're speaking about all the challenges along the way, and then the fintech-like experiences, right? We want self-service solutions and want to kind of go in that direction. What strategy should the TPAs adopt, right, to differentiate themselves and provide value beyond the process automation capabilities that they bring?
Yeah, it probably is a little bit market segment dependent. I think the smaller market, even though we're trying to support more online and self-service service models, they're still going to look to the TPA for that deeper consultative and involvement in their day-to-day of managing a retirement plan. I think it will evolve. You're right. I think it's looking at the service as more of a professional service. If it becomes more commoditized, then you're going to struggle to charge the fees that you want, and you're going to feel the same pressure that everyone in our industry has. So I think it's the evolution. To me, if I can make a loose analogy, would be how we evolved with the participant, right? Initially, we basically tried to educate participants. We gave them an investment lineup and said, go figure it out, go build a good retirement plan. We realized that didn't work very well, and then I think it evolved to model portfolios, target date funds, managed accounts, investment advice. And then auto enrollment came along. So now you didn't even have to think about joining the plan. We just put you in the plan. And then comes QDIAs to further improve upon the experience. We really got the participant down to the point where it was just let it happen. We'll take it from here. I think certainly not a QDIA per se, but I think the TPA can certainly play the role of really just taking over the management of the plan for most of the clients. If you're looking to charge that more premium service, I think PEPs have at least shown that there's probably an appetite for offboarding a lot of the risk and work. I think some of the things, historically, right, we were a directed model. The employer had to do everything, and we responded to their direction. And then came 316, where we started to take some of the tasks off their plate for a fee. I mean, we have 402A out there where we play plan administrator, maybe not as prevalent, but we're really taking it to the other extreme. We're really almost getting to the point where the employer is going to be our source of good data. Like what we've been saying through this entire presentation, get us the data we need to do our job. So I think a lot of the 316s, which are add-ons, I think as we evolve, is going to be standard fare. I mean, those are going to be the services that are expected and will become core services. And the more extreme 402A and other plan administrator roles might be the more premium service model. It's going to be much more consultative than, responsive to plan sponsor direction.
So the shaping up of being more proactive and shaping the products and experiences versus kind of saying, hey, just we'll do what is told to us, is where this is shaping up. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
I know we started the discussion today talking about the total debt that we have, right? We spoke about data, process, technology, and skills and talent. I do want to go back to the talent conversation, right? Because that's important. Because we spoke about everything from the elements of digital transformation to change management to talking about how do we measure it. But in the end of the day, it's a very strong, heavy. If you don't have the right people or the right skills, it becomes a bit of a challenge. So Tim, I wanted to come to you, right? As you see the future of retirements industry, what are these critical skills that we need to be successful? How should professionals be thinking about these skills and building them as they're kind of looking at all the transformations we are seeing across the board, and again, because of AI, but otherwise as well?
Yeah. So, and I know we're up against our time, so I'll be very, very brief with this. I think the number one thing for me is the ability to embrace change. It's coming faster than ever, especially in the days of AI and all these technology changes and advancements. Don't be afraid of change. Spend some time figuring out how it can benefit you, right? So, we hear so much concern about, well, my job is going to go away because of AI and so forth. And there may be some of those things that happen, but a lot of times what that's going to open up then is opportunity for you to do something of much higher value to the organization. So the trick is for our employees to find out, how does AI and these other technologies, how can they be used to enhance my value to the company? So instead of fighting it, use it for your benefit. Be curious. Have a natural curiosity about the way things work and about how you're able to plug into just a natural curiosity. I think will take you a long way in any career, but especially at a time like this.
That's a fantastic way to put it, Tim. I couldn't agree less. Yeah. I know we're getting questions from our audience as well, and I would encourage everyone to put more questions that they have for the panelists out here in the Q&A tab. If you're not able to take those questions, we'll definitely get back to you with our answers. But I do have one which I really like, right? And I wanted to, come to this group to ask this question. So let me read out the question right there. And Mahesh, I'm going to come to you with this one.
Sure.
There's always a perception of risk that comes with change, right? And I think that's the big question. What is the tipping point when the status quo becomes a risk in itself, right? So this is like the hubris or inertia, right? If you don't move, does that become a risk in itself?
I think so. I mean, even if you look at the industry, right, the speed at which consolidation has happened, and you talked about fintechs already coming in, there's already a lot of challenges for them. And even take the retirement industry, right, there is so much PE money coming in because they see the amount of trillions of dollars assets that you are seeing. So there are more forces that are playing in this industry. That itself is really going to put everybody to question the status quo and change. So I feel the retirement industry is ready for it, and the tipping point is here. It's not tomorrow. If we're already living through this, we don't see it now because we are right there. But a couple of years from now, we'll realize the tipping point occurred, and many of them have come out strongly.
Steve and Tim, any views on this one before we move to the next question?
No, nothing really to add. I would agree with Mahesh and what he said there. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I tend to agree. Yeah, I think it's we're there, and so you're either going to adapt or you're going to get left behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I heard
And
this.
AI, I'm sorry, AI is going to be, it is, I heard someone describe it as like, he thought it was going to be like the next Y2K. So he kind of thought, nah, it's not, it's going to be a big nothing burger. He's changed his tune and he understands now AI is going to be in everything. So just be prepared for that. And as I said, be prepared to use it for your benefit.
Yeah. And I heard this in a keynote session today. I think it's kind of, the way they put it was very interesting. They said the pace at which AI and digital technologies are evolving, it's been the fastest right now. And what's interesting is if we look at the future, this is going to be the slowest it evolves, right? So again, it's like it's always going to evolve at a pace faster than what we are seeing today. And I think that's where the hubris is something which we all will need to avoid as we think about it. So we're getting a few more questions, and I have a few more minutes out here, so I'm going to use that and to answer the questions out here. So we will, again, there was a question around recording being posted. Yes, we will post the recording, so you'll be able to view it offline. So thank you for kind of, asking us this. The other question is about AI safety and AI adoption. So how do we see AI safety, kind of a core theme as we are looking at AI adoption? And Mahesh, I'll again come back to you. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think there was enough said throughout this call, right? Nobody wants to bet their job or get a call because you had a data breach or even any trust breach, right? I mean, data breach is something everybody knows. But with AI, you got to figure out what are the controls you put in place for trust and that you don't breach it. So that's foundational. And then all the things that you did for data security, whether it's zero trust, same thing, right? Here it's high trust. It's the opposite, right? You've got to make sure whether there is no bias and you don't run into any regulatory compliance issues. And then lastly, training the models, right? I think there's a lot of models. You got to define what is public versus private and what data is used to train the models, and do you have control over that? In fact, we're doing some experiments on AI models. And all of these clients have said, look, my data is mine. You can train the model with my data, but don't use it for somebody else, right? You got to build that trust into the whole process. So that's kind of what I'm seeing, multiple levels of things being done from an AI safety standpoint. And credit to some of the hyperscalers, whoever you end up using, they're putting tons of investments in all of these things as well, right? So they become additive to all the controls and security measures you put in.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. Yeah, adding to that, right, whether or not, how do you deploy the solutions, right? Are you deploying it within your environment, or is it something where you're connecting externally? And I think you're right. It's going so fast, and there are more and more players probably every day is really going to stress test your, I'd say, your relationship validation process. Anytime you bring on a new relationship, going through the due diligence to understand who they are, how they operate, and their security protocols will be hypercritical here, because I think a lot of new players, they don't have a lot of history to demonstrate how they've handled stuff like this in the past.
Yep.
Yeah. So I know we're at the top of the hour out here. So we will, kind of respond to all the other questions offline. But I wanted to thank, all of you for joining us for this discussion, and specifically Steve, Tim, and Mahesh. Thank you for this insightful discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I learned so much. I was kind of taking copious amount of notes as we are going along. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on this topic, and I hope our audience takeaway is a very strong way of thinking about digital transformation, application of this into processes, and keeping the themes around change, measures, safety, security, and risk at the same time as they're adopting it, and being nimble. I think that was a key word, right, we took today as we go along around this. But again, thank you, all three of you. Looking forward to our next one. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Congruent.
Bye-bye.
So you